Welcome back to AoS Explained, the series where I cover topics essential to understanding conversation in the world of competitive Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay up to date with this series. Today we will cover Anvils and the roles they play in AoS 4th edition. Anvils are units that can survive at least one full turn of combat with an opponent's hammer unit. Anvils can find this level of tankiness in a couple different ways: good save characteristics, being health dense, or applying several debuffs to the attacking unit. These traits are not exclusive, and higher class Anvils often possess at least two of these characteristics, and sometimes even all three. Let's dive into some examples of units with each characteristic and some of their strengths and weaknesses. The most common Anvils are units with good saves. Usually, these units have a 3-up save or better, and also often have access to a ward, either on their war scroll or through an army rule. A common example of an Anvil would be the Immortus Guard in OCR Bone Reapers, or Annihilators in Stormcast Eternals. Both boast strong saves, with a rare 2+ save on the Annihilators, allowing both units to still take a punch from high-rend hammers. However, the downside of both of these units is their movement characteristic. Several Anvil units have this same balance, where they are quite slow, but make up for it by being exceptionally tanky. Now, some units can be considered an Anvil by virtue of the amount of health that the unit possesses, not necessarily the amount of damage it can ignore. Quantity has a value all of its own, and this holds true in Age of Sigmar. Some hammers, specifically the Scalpel subclass, often consistently do a certain amount of damage, usually averaging around 25 to 30 damage against a 4-up save. Therefore, if your unit has 40 or more health, it can take a punch from some hammers and live to tell the tale. A couple examples of units that can manage this are Deadwalker zombies from Soulblight Gravelords or Plague Bearers from the Maggotkin of Nurgle. While both of these units have an abysmal 6-up save, they both have wards, a 6-up and a 5-up respectively, which helps shrug off some of the damage that may be inflicted. Some units can find themselves having to play the Anvil role, while not actually being an Anvil based on their own war scroll. These units are usually backed up by other units in their army, and the spells or prayers or battle traits that make them stronger. An interesting example of this concept would be Skaven's Plague Monks. A reinforced unit has 40 health on a 6-up save with no ward and no real survivability beyond that. However, Skaven has access to a prayer that gives +1 to save and -1 to be wounded on a super chant, a -1 to be hit and a 6-up ward from the Screaming Bell, and -1 to be wounded from the Bell of Doom. This amount of defensive buffs can now drop some of the game's hardest hitting hammers to below the 40 damage threshold, allowing the monks to survive and keep the hammer locked in combat. Now, all of these examples that I just listed are incredibly slow, with the fastest being the Plague Monks at a 6-inch movement, and the slowest being the Annihilators and Plague Bearers at 4 inches. Having a low movement characteristic is a pretty common trait among Anvil units, but it is not always the case. Some armies do have access to fast Anvils, and they serve a very unique role: pinning. Pinning is when fast Anvils can be slingshotted into your opponent's front line of units to block their army in the deployment zone. Some examples of these pinning units are Maggotkin of Nurgle's Puscoil Blightlords, or Slaves to Darkness Chaos Knights. With the Puscoil Blightlords, Nurgle has access to a battle formation called the Affliction Cyst, which allows you to place up to 2 units that have the fly keyword anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from your opponent at the end of deployment. If you took the first turn, this gives you a 3-inch charge into your opponent's front line. Chaos Knights have access to be pledged to Slaanesh, allowing them to roll an extra dice when they charge and have a 10-inch movement characteristic, and a +2 to charge rolls from the Chaos Lord on Karkadrak. This allows a reinforced unit of 40 health on a 3-up save to slam into your opponent's front line on turn 1. But why should you do that? Why would you want to send a fourth of your army into your opponent's screen? Pinning is a tactical tool used by some armies to obtain a space advantage over your opponent. Take Nurgle's Puscoil Blightlords. A reinforced unit has 32 health, a 4-up save, and a 5-up ward save. They will almost certainly survive not only your turn, but your opponent's first turn as well after shoving this unit into your opponent's deployment zone. This allows the rest of your army to leisurely walk up the board, controlling all of the objectives in no man's land and scoring some non-interaction tactics, like Seize the Center, for free. Pinning not only allows you to have a large space advantage over your opponent, but also gives you the ability to cripple your opponent's hammer units. Several hammers, including popular examples like Varangard from Slaves to Darkness, or Vanguard Paladors from Stormcast Eternals, have the +1 damage on the charge weapon ability. By taking control of the charge, you've effectively lowered the total damage of these units. Pinning also shuts down the seasonal rule special assignment, which gives +1 to rend against a certain kind of unit on the charge. Being able to deny some units the ability to charge can shut down your opponent, while not having to destroy any of their key units. The Beastclaw Raiders side of the Ogre Maw tribes is a perfect example of an army you would want to pin early in the game. They have the ability to do upwards of 30 mortal damage in the charge phase, which can evaporate armies without a ward save, as well as they get +1 damage on the charge. Being able to keep those models in their deployment zone and off the charge cripples both their game plan and ability to score points. So now we know how Anvil units get their toughness, and how they strategically use it to control space during the battle. We have also covered some of the basic examples of Anvils and pinning Anvils. But who are some of the superstars? Looking at units that are both toting a 3-up save and are also wound dense, you will find the Stormcast Eternals Protectors and Slaves to Darkness Chaos Warriors. Chaos Warriors Reinforced have 40 health and have access to a ward with their army rules. Protectors are 30 health reinforced, but have a 5-up ward as long as they are in combat range of a hero. Protectors do not see as much play, since they are outclassed by other units in Stormcast, but Warriors see frequent use in a lot of Footslog Slaves to Darkness lists where they want to camp out on top of objectives. These units will find themselves the strongest when doing just that, dying slowly on contested midfield objectives. Disciples of Tzeentch and a few other armies have access to another style of Anvil play referred to as tar pits. These tar pits are characterized by the ability to last multiple turns in combat by applying debuffs and consistently having a way to return models to the unit. In Tzeentch's case, this tar pit is created by combining pink horrors and blue horrors. On death, the pink horror models can return models to the blue horror unit. Tzeentch can also very easily pass out multiple forms of -1 to hit and -1 to wound. This allows the massive blob of health to be incredibly durable. Soulblight Gravelords have a similar interaction they can do with Deathwalker zombies and other units of the like. These armies and units combine health density with stacked debuffs to create a near impenetrable anvil. Not all anvils are incredibly health dense. In fact, some sit in the 20 to 25 health range and can still tank for multiple rounds. A couple of unique examples are Karazai the Scarred from the Stormcast Eternals and Archaon the Everchosen from the Slaves to Darkness faction. Both take advantage of the seasonal bodyguard role, subtracting 1 from the attack characteristics of charging units as long as they are next to their bodyguard. Karazai gives out -2 attacks while having a tail swipe rampage that cripples charging units, dealing mortal damage on 5-ups, all while possessing a 3-up save and a 5-up ward from his bodyguard. Archaon similarly has a strong rampage, healing capabilities with his faction's rules, and 25 health on a 3-up save and a 5-up ward. Both of these models have impressive 12-inch movements that also contradict the stereotype of a slow anvil. Finally, we have the true masters of the craft, anvils that just do everything anvil. A shining example comes from the Maggotkin of Nurgle once again, with Putrid Blight Kings. They have the health density, at 30 health in a reinforced unit. They have the saves, with a 3-up save and a 5-up ward save. And they have it all with the ability to apply debuffs within the army with the army's unlimited spell for -1 to be wounded. Very few armies have anything that can hold a candle to the pure mass that is Putrid Blight Kings. They are the golden standard of Anvils in Age of Sigmar 4th edition. As I'm sure you've noticed, a lot of these examples have come from the same armies repeatedly. Anvils tend to have the same problem that screens have. Not every army has one. Some armies, like Nurgle, where everything has a 5-up ward, can call almost anything an anvil if you put enough of it out there. Kharadron Overlords, on the other hand, don't really have access to a traditional anvil without using regiments of renown. So, how does this affect list building? As always, list building is entirely situational to the army you are building for. Some armies do not have anvils at all, and I wouldn't focus on trying to create one out of the principles I have shared with you today. Instead, much like hammers, think about what role they are filling, and their point cost. If you're an army like Nurgle, you don't have true high-damage scalpels or glass cannons. The best you can offer are bruisers that spend more time as anvils than hammers. If I am building a dedicated list to be tanky and sitting on circles and scoring points, I am taking at least one anvil that has at least 2 of the 3 characteristics I mentioned at the beginning of this video. You do not want to be caught taking too many slow anvils and be forced to go second, and lose the ability to get to the middle objectives because your opponent has gotten there first. Anvils are great. but definitely less ubiquitous than hammers, and often the first thing trimmed out of a lot of lists in the current edition focused entirely around meeting damage checks and movement speed. However, some armies find themselves in a tactical advantage to bring an anvil or two to the battle to disrupt your opponent's ability to score on objectives, or survive the strongest hammers, or even leave your opponent stuck in their deployment zone. Thank you all for watching. What would you like to see next? I have more videos in the Explained series in the works, and I'm also working on a longer form video covering some more complex tactics. Please leave a comment on what you want to see in the future, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date on my videos.